Welcome to the PA Books podcast. PA Books is a production of PCN, the Pennsylvania Cable Network. This program features interviews with authors of books on Pennsylvania people, history, sports, business, nature, and politics. While the focus is always on Pennsylvania, topics like the Revolutionary War, the Battle of Gettysburg, the Industrial Revolution, the coal and steel industries, and authors like John Updike, David McCullough, and John Grogan have a universal appeal. We hope you enjoy this podcast.
This week on PA Books, the author of Keystone Corruption, Brad Bumsted.
Brad Bumsted, author of Keystone Corruption, a Pennsylvania insider's view of a state gone wrong. You're the insider?
I am, indeed.
How did you get to be an insider? What's your capacity?
Working there 27 years at the state capitol, that got me in the direction of being an insider. Reporters at the Capitol mingle with a lot of these people. We talk regularly to the legislative leaders and all of that, so you have inside information. It doesn't mean you act as an insider might.
Why did you decide to write a book?
Well, some of the abuses I saw over the years that took place, even before there were charges filed against anybody or any criminal cases, I just thought, how do they get away with this stuff at the state capitol? I mean, not just waste of tax money, but incumbency protection programs, whams, walking around money, just this millions of dollars spent on glorifying incumbents so they can win their next election. I saw all that stuff for years, and it really bothered me. I thought, is there any way that anybody can really stop that? But it wasn't until these criminal charges started falling after Bonusgate that you got a real true picture of what went on there.
Is this something that's been a culture in Pennsylvania politics for forever?
Well, it has, and one of the themes of the book is the cyclical nature of corruption. We'll see a wave of corruption, and then things will die down for maybe years, maybe even a decade, and then you're hit with another wave. And I believe that happens because people forget about it. It becomes sort of, seems like ancient history to some of the people who are there. And they maybe think they'll cross the line here, cross the line there. And next thing you know, they're in trouble. I thought one of the more interesting things was a comment that I had from one of the people who was involved in the Computergate case as a witness. He could easily have been a defendant. And this is on the House Republican side, and he told me that at one point he was asked to do something, and it was in a gray area, so he went there. Then he was asked again to go there, and he got in, and there was even bigger gray area. And he said, finally I found myself totally in a gray area. Everything was, questionable. And, I think that's what happens to people there after they've been there a long time.
Well, is this the current round of trials and people who have been convicted of corruption, did they inherit a system that was like that, or did they create a system that was like that?
In regard to using public money for campaigns?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Yeah, I think that I know that for years it was accepted practice at the Capitol to do some campaigning out of the state office or with state staff. Okay, but it was minimal. I mean, it was small stuff. You would occasionally see a legislator send a staffer over to the election bureau with petitions for filing. Okay, is that, a felony? I don't think so. So small things like that would occur. And from about 2002 on, it just got out of hand. I mean, it just really blew up in a way that nobody had anticipated, where millions of dollars were then spent to try to keep and retain majority status in the House. There's one portion in the book where Representative John Perzel is on the witness stand, and he says that being in the majority is everything. He said, if you're not in the majority, you might as well not be there. You can't do anything. All the power comes from being in the majority. So that's why they fight so hard and why they used all this money to try to gain that majority status or to keep it.
Could you, for people who are not familiar with it, can you explain what the law is? What are they allowed to do and what are they not allowed to do? How do they draw that line between the campaign and the legislative office?
Well, I think the bright line was painted in a case involving former Representative Jeffrey Habay. And it basically says you can't use public resources for campaigns, that if you do, it's theft, and that there's a personal gain involved for someone who does that. And, far be it from me, I'm not an attorney to give you the exact terms of it, but I think you know when you're doing wrong. And, you're not supposed to be doing any campaigning at the Capitol, no fundraising calls there. You're not supposed to use your staff for that. And since these prosecutions, people have been more careful about that. They've used outside, professional staff for the campaigns as opposed to legislative aides. But again, it's cyclical, and I don't have a great deal of hope for the future that everything will be hunky-dory.
And there are less bright lines too, like newsletters to constituents.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the stuff that's been going on long before any of these cases, and still continues to a certain extent. And that is, they have public service announcements where the incumbent will be featured in a TV spot, which there's a minimal amount of public service there, but it seems more to glorify the incumbent. News releases, and more importantly, the flyers that are sent to constituents' home that usually have, multiple colored pictures of the incumbent and stories sort of glorifying their work at the Capitol, when in reality they might be a backbencher. All of that paid for by us.
How often would there be stories when the indictments were coming out a couple of years ago that broke that reporters just all knew was happening and couldn't believe it took this long for like there are things in the newsroom and can't report?
Well, there are things you think you know and can't report. You have to be really careful, particularly in criminal cases. You may think you know that someone is under investigation. You've heard that from a couple different people. But are you going to write that story? It depends what it is, who they are, and who's telling you that. But it's a very difficult thing to do, to report on grand jury investigations where it's all secret, takes place behind closed doors. You really don't know what's going on. The only way you can get at some of it is wait outside the grand jury room, and we would do that occasionally where we had a suspicion that maybe so-and-so was going to testify that day, then try to talk to them on the way out. Now, prosecutors are not allowed to give out any information about grand jury proceedings. It's against the law. But witnesses who go and testify before a grand jury may tell the press or anyone else what they said. So occasionally you do get that to happen. It's very rare, but you do get people who will talk about it. But, we knew that there were numerous investigations going on. They seemed like they took an enormous amount of time. But in the end, unless there's a search warrant served, as there was in one case with the House Democrats, or there's subpoenas of people being subpoenaed to testify, which they're documents issued by the court or by the attorneys, and you can confirm that somebody got a subpoena, there's something solid occasionally.
Are there also things you would see the spending of state money and grants given to this person or that person? You have a story about a former state representative who got a grant for $900,000 for a business, and the address was his house.
Yes.
The times would you see those and think, what is going on here?
Oh yeah, over the years we've seen, enormous abuses with the whams walking around money. Recently, Representative Dwight Evans, when he was House Appropriations Chairman, got $1 million for a jazz festival in his district. Well, is that a good thing for the people in his district? Yes, I guess so, but it's a pretty good thing for him as well. All of this legal now. But yeah, there have been abuses over the years. There's no question about it. But what legislators say, their defense of this is, look, there are a lot of good programs that come with WHAMs. They build softball fields. They take the money back to the communities for community centers, that sort of thing. And that's true. There are a lot of things like that. But the problem always was with WHAMs is that who got them and why? In other words, maybe a community got a certain project. Were they the most needy community in the state to get that? Maybe not. Most likely it's because their legislator had the most clout with leaders or voted a certain way, to get that project.
What does WHAMS mean?
WHAMS means discretionary money for legislators' pet projects controlled by the legislative leaders. For years and years, the leaders, a block of money would be assigned to them, a certain amount, and they would use that and then dole it out to their members who were loyal. If they were disloyal members, didn't vote the way they were supposed to vote, maybe they wouldn't get as much money.
So the leaders of each caucus just have sole discretion over, okay, here you go, here's $900,000.
They did.
They do not now?
I don't believe they do now. Governor Tom Corbett, when he came in, said there aren't going to be any more WHAMs in any budgets that he signs. And there's still some discretionary money, there's no question about it, but WHAMs in the old form that we knew, I don't believe are there any longer. Now, former Republican Governor Tom Ridge also said, I'm getting rid of WHAMs. And somehow they came back. So who knows how long this will last.
Does the public like WHAMs?
If it's their project, if their community gets the project, I suppose they do.
You've been a reporter for 27 years?
Much longer than that, 27 years at the Capitol.
For whom?
Well, I worked for Gannett News Service, the company that owns USA Today, for the first 15 or so years that I was there. And then I went to work for the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review.
Now, what was covering the Capitol like when you started?
Well, it was different. I think this would apply to the news media in general. We didn't have the internet. We couldn't look up names or past stories on the internet. We didn't see every news release that every group puts out all of a sudden coming in on your computer screen. So now everything is like that. You see all these press statements and all these things that people are saying, and it just, it gives all these groups this, room to be able to try to, quote, influence the media through all these statements that somebody's going to bite on one of them and write a story. Whereas in the past, you got paper news releases and you could decide what to do with them. But I think things in the past, too, in the 1980s were more secretive, believe it or not, than they are now. But it was pretty bad then, even to try to get certain legislative records. The legislature wasn't covered by the right to know law. Now it barely is. It's covered for spending, but nothing else. But there was a time where they didn't have to give you anything. And that was until, I want to say, 5 or 6 years ago.
You mentioned a phrase earlier, computer gate. You also mentioned bonus gate in here. Can you go over a couple of those and what they involved and when they started to break?
Sure. Bonus gate was a scheme whereby the House Democratic leadership gave bonuses to legislative staff who worked on campaigns, not just their campaigns, but special elections, House Democrat campaigns, sometimes even some other local race that legislative leaders were interested in. House Democrats, under Mike Veon, when he was the Democratic leader, spent $1.4 million on these bonuses that were secret. They went to different people. And, what was fundamentally wrong with that, aside from the fact that it was illegal in a lot of different ways, but if you went and looked up a legislative staffer's salary, and it appeared that it's $50,000. Well, in reality, it might have been $65,000, but you didn't know that because that extra supplement wasn't part of the salary list that you would see. So that abuse took place, ramped up over a 4 or 5 year period. Mike Veon was convicted of several felonies in regard to that. A lot of people thought that former House Speaker Bill DeWeese should have been implicated in that. He was implicated, should have been charged in that, but he wasn't. And he took the Fifth Amendment during Veon's trial, and Veon's lawyers blamed DeWeese for the bonus gate thing, saying, look, he was the top leader. So DeWeese has always denied that he was involved in that. Based on the evidence I've seen and the people I've talked to, I believe that he was aware of it, maybe not controlling it, maybe not aware of every single dollar that went out, but pretty hard to be in his position and not know what's going on.
What was illegal about giving the bonuses?
Well, the fact that they weren't part of the payroll, and they were given for political work. So you were using bonus, state money, to pay someone for a campaign work. That's what's illegal.
Is it legal for someone who is a staffer to work on a campaign as a second job?
As a second job?
I mean, can they have a part-time job working for the campaign while still working full-time for the state?
That's a good question. I'm not sure about that. I think what we do see is that staff will, still work for a legislator's campaign on a volunteer basis to try to help that legislator get elected. And if they do that solely on their own time, solely in evenings, on weekends, it's not illegal. They're allowed to do that. And, it's understandable. The legislative staffer would have an interest in seeing their boss get reelected because their job could be on the line. So, and they may believe in the policies that particular legislator is espousing, so they want to see him get elected. I still don't think it's a good idea to have staff members work on campaigns, even on private time, because then it starts to, you could see how it could creep back in and start to get commingled again.
Is it hard to get the public to care about this? I mean, is this a finer point of government that is just too detailed for the public to get excited about?
I think some of it is, but I think that the legislative pay raise, middle of the night pay raise that occurred, really ignited the public's interest in this, and it was something that everybody could relate to. Everybody understood how this had been done secretly and without, a public hearing, and it outraged a lot of people. And it was the first real reform movement that I've seen in some time. Yes, sometimes they can get fired up about it, but other points in all of this may seem obscure.
Now, was there anything inherently illegal of the pay raise that happened? Because Governor Rendell, when he signed it, said, "Well, it's legal. That's all there is. That's all I'll say."
He did say that. There was nothing illegal on its face. However, the constitutionality of a legislator getting to be able to collect some of the money during his current term of office is certainly suspicious in terms of legality. It may be completely illegal. I don't know. But that is what happened here, where you got the raise and then you were also able to collect it early through something they called unvouchered expenses. So not everybody did it, but you saw over 150 legislators sign up to get the money early, even though they're prohibited from doing that until they're reelected. But they said, well, it's not salary. It's just expenses. So yes, that would be illegal, most likely.
What was the press's reaction at the time? Were you working when the pay raise happened?
I was.
And was it obvious what they were doing?
Yes. I mean, once it happened. But leading up to it, no. I mean, there were maybe 2 weeks prior to the pay raise where we had an idea they wanted to do it, that something was going on. There were rumors about it. Rendell even publicly encouraged the legislature to do it at one point. He implied that if they did, he wanted to see approval of some of his social programs and more spending for some of those. So it's like, wow, something is going on here. But for the most part, the bill itself that had the details of the pay raise was not available. It was not only available beforehand during the vote, it wasn't available after the conference committee approved it. I mean, they walked away and everybody's like, well, what are the numbers? Who's getting a raise? How much of a raise? Nobody knew. So it was maddening to a lot of reporters in that respect. And just the way they went about it, this committee of 6, a conference committee that approved this, they did it, and they got up and they walked away and they wouldn't answer any questions. It's like, well, wait a minute, you don't have the bill, you're not telling us what's in it, and you won't even explain it. So that made a lot of people really angry about it. Now, as reporters, we're supposed to keep emotion out of this, and 99.9% of the time, I do, and I think most others do too. You can be very, look at these sort of things just purely from an intellectual standpoint and evaluate them analytically. But this was such a visceral reaction because the reporters who were there that night witnessed democracy being trampled. And that's a strong statement, but I believe that it's true.
When did you start noticing that there was a public reaction to the pay raise?
Well, shortly afterwards, and I have a line in the book about that, Terry Madonna, who is a political analyst for a long period, and press has talked to him for a long time about it. I asked him about the end of the first week after the pay raise, what do you think? Do you think there's going to be much reaction to this? And he said no. He said the history in the past has been that this sort of dies out pretty quickly. And I agreed with him because I had seen that before, that there was not much reaction. But what we both didn't take into account was the internet. Things had changed. And all of a sudden, boom, everybody's writing back and forth about this. Web pages were going up. Groups were being formed. I mean, the internet is what really changed the public reaction to the pay raise.
What was it like covering the public reaction?
It was interesting because I had more phone calls and more emails on that than any other topic I've ever covered my whole career. I mean, stuff just came pouring in from readers in Western Pennsylvania, from others, some of just pure venomous anger, some suggesting, ways to fix the legislature, some suggesting their dissatisfaction with the whole place. And look, as a result of that, there were at least 50 new legislators the following cycle. Not all of those had been defeated. Some people just retired rather than face the voters after that vote. But it did result in some major change in terms of the players. After that, there were also numerous reform proposals that were brought up, and some enacted it and all that. But those changes, while good, were at the periphery of what goes on there, not at the heart of it.
If you were to explain to the general public just how Harrisburg works, how the legislature works, can you boil it down? I mean, what is power? How does the leadership work? How do they get power and keep it?
Well, the leaders get their power by being elected by the rank and file members, much like a union. As a result, they have this power. And Pennsylvania, for decades, has been a really heavy leadership-driven state. Leaders could pretty much decide anything. They still do, of course, have the power to bring up bills and decide when we're going to vote on certain things. But in the past, they had enormous power. And it was very difficult to challenge any of them if you disagreed for members. I think that's lessened a good bit, and I think that the leaders who are there are cognizant of that and try to be more open with members, aware of what had happened in the past. But what makes the place tick, again, it's power. It's, as Perzel said, it's being in the majority. It's being able to pass your bills. Would you want to, if you believe strongly in A, B, C, and D as bills that need to be passed, would you want to be in the minority and just have to sort of go along and hope for the best that maybe somehow one of those might be brought up?
Does the minority party have any ability to do anything in Harrisburg?
Not much, but Senator Vincent Fumo was one of the rare examples of somebody in the minority party who was able to accomplish an enormous amount. He's a Democrat. He was in the minority party in the Senate, and he learned how to use the confirmation process in the Senate that requires, 2/3 vote, not just a simple majority. And he learned how, in certain instances, with enough Democrats, they could block a governor's nominee. So governors eventually had to wind up going through Vince Fumo if they wanted anything in the Senate. Vince Fumo was so powerful that he had Democrats in the House who would help him block certain things that he didn't want passed there. They were called Fumocrats. So here's a guy who was in the minority, and he did have all this power. Now he just recently got out of prison and is confined to his house here for a while.
How did he amass and use so much power being in the minority party? Because I know for a time there was it 30 Republicans to 20 Democrats, which is a pretty distinct minority, and yet he was able to get things done?
Well, confirmation process was just part of it with governors. Others were, deals he might make with other senators. He just knew how to leverage things to get what he wanted.
Is he just smarter than everybody else at that?
He was pretty damn smart. It's hard to say smarter than everybody, but he was. And a lot of people were really upset at the 61-month sentence he got for what amounted to misappropriation of over $4 million. They say now, at the time, $3 million at the time of the verdict. And people thought the sentence was too light, and the judge let him off the hook. And, he recently got out with good time served. So he's paid his dues, and he's out now in Philadelphia.
Have you done many one-on-one interviews with him
No.
over the years?
I was on a TV show with him one time where I think it was a Terry Madonna show. It might have been another where I've talked to him. I've been in his office with other reporters as we've interviewed him, and fascinating figure.
What's he like to be around?
He's very congenial, and he can be very charming, and he's helpful to reporters who are there trying to cover an issue. At the same time, his critics would say he was a bully. He rolled over people to get what he wanted. One of the things that enabled him to amass power, and I in the book I quote the late Al Neary, who'd been a reporter for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and then did some communications work in Harrisburg. And Neary had the interesting perspective of having been a student of Vince Fumo's when Fumo was a biology teacher in Philadelphia. So here Senator Fumo was his teacher, and then Neary came around to being a reporter much later covering him. And he knew him and understood him. And he said that what Fumo had done over the years, over a long period of time, was amass power by placing people in agencies throughout state government, whether that was FIA, whether that was the Turnpike Commission. He just had people all over. So he could virtually push a button, speed dial, and if he needed something in a particular agency, he most likely would be able to get it, or at least get it rolling, or maybe block it.
Was he the same type of political powerhouse in the city of Philadelphia as he was in Harrisburg?
I believe so. Although, when John Perzel was majority leader and speaker, there was always this undescribed tension between the two of them and former Governor Rendell as to who the big guy was in Philadelphia.
John Perzel, since you brought his name up, what is his? Who was he? And just bring us up to speed on what was he like as a politician, and what's his story?
Fast-talking former maitre d' from Philadelphia who worked extremely hard to get where he did, worked his way up through the Republican caucus to become majority leader, then eventually speaker. And he was good to be around. He was a good man, I believe, but he just went astray. And there was this moment that he testified to during the trial of former Representative Brett Feast, where he was in New Orleans as they were negotiating a contract for computer data for the House Republican caucus. And a question came up about how you're going to pay for it. And I don't know exactly what the words were at this point, I can't recall, but the thrust of it was he never suggested that the taxpayers shouldn't pay for it. And he should have stated, and he realized, should have said, look, this is just campaign's going to pay for it. But he didn't, and that started the ball rolling, where then taxpayers paid for all this other campaign data and computer equipment that House Republicans used in elections, or tried to in some cases.
Now, John Perzel had a reputation for being a big fundraiser, also good at raising money.
He raised $17 million, he once calculated, for his own campaign, the Republican Party, and other House Republicans. And, he was a great fundraiser. One of the suggestions, I always wondered why it is that people like him would use tax money for certain things when he could raise so much campaign money and had that at his fingertips. And what people have suggested is, well, it's hard to raise campaign money. I mean, you have to make a lot of calls. You have to be willing to convince people to give money. But here, you've got this pot of money sitting there, tax money, just use it, you know. So who knows exactly why, but I mentioned in the book, and I believe this, that Perzel, I'm betting, believes to this day that he didn't do anything wrong. A former aide of his told me that John Perzel saw no difference between John Perzel, the candidate, and John Perzel, the elected official. It was all part of the same deal. And that was true for a lot of these guys, but in particular in his case.
How many of the people who you cover in the book, and in the back page you have 8, I believe it is 8 of the members of the leadership who are in prison as we speak right now.
Save for Fumo, who got out. It's 7 of the 8 now.
And then some people who are not in leadership who went to jail.
Oh, well beyond that page, yes.
How many of them said, well, yes, I did wrong. I see that I went over the line. And how many of them are just, like you said, John Perzel, don't think they did anything wrong?
Well, Perzel admitted doing wrong. He pled guilty rather than go to trial. But as usual, I think that was a smart, calculated move on his part. He was a good negotiator. He saw the writing on the wall, and he realized if he pled guilty, he might be able to get a 2 to 2.5 year sentence, as opposed, if you're convicted at trial, they tend to throw the book at you for wasting the court's resources and all of that when you were guilty. I think he saw that coming, and his wife has some major illnesses, and it was a difference between serving 2 years in prison or maybe 5. So he was a very practical politician. So I think he made that decision. Whether or not he really believed that he did anything wrong, I still don't know, and I don't believe that he did. He took responsibility for it, but that's a different thing than saying you did wrong.
Another one is Bill DeWeese.
Quite a character. One of my most favorite people in the legislature over the years, just because of what a character he was. He was so different, and he was funny, and this guy was an ex-Marine who took over the House Democratic leadership in a coup against former Speaker Bob O'Donnell, and Dwight Evans, who we mentioned before in the Wham, was DeWeese's lieutenant to take over the caucus. And for years, at one position or another, DeWeese was, in the top ranks of the Democratic leadership. And I heard one legislator say at his trial that when he came in, DeWeese was the best legislator he ever saw. He was really good as a legislator. That he could, move with the best of them on the floor, and he was. That's the thing about all these guys. They were very effective legislators. We mentioned Fumo before, the kind of effectiveness he had even in the minority. These were all very capable legislators who got a lot done in a lot of cases. They just crossed the line. Take, if you will, Fumo. Two of the major bills that he had a huge influence on were gaming and establishing casinos in Pennsylvania. A lot of your viewers may think that's not a great thing, but millions of people go to them and enjoy it. And also a transportation bill in 2007 that wound up, getting annual money for the Turnpike Commission through a series of bond issues, and there are many other provisions in it. But he was a very effective legislator, and Perzel was. Perzel helped put the deal together with Governor Rendell for property tax rebates in return for gambling, and people now get these checks if they own property, I guess every year if you sign up for it, where you may get $150, $200, $250 as a rebate on your property taxes. That's been made light of and by some, in the sense that the increases you face in increased school district taxes overtake the amount that you get in this rebate. But in any case, it's what Rendell ran on. Let's approve casino gambling. Let's cut property taxes, and Perzel helped him do it. Perzel helped Rendell on a wide variety of other things. He was smart enough to realize that Rendell was a popular mayor of Philadelphia. He, had an enormous amount of influence, and constantly fighting with him in Harrisburg would not be good politically in Philadelphia. So he didn't.
Was John Perzel, are there other things that you and other reporters knew were going on that they didn't get convicted of? Or was that using campaign money, using state money to campaign, was that the core of the corruption?
It was the core of it. We had an idea about this but couldn't write it or prove it. There was in the grand jury presentment against Perzel and the others an alleged scheme that he and his former chief of staff Brian Preskey had to use some of the campaign data they had to form a political consulting company and make a lot of money on the side. But the company might have been formed, but not much ever came of it.
You covered the whole debate about legalizing gaming?
Yes.
Was that, when it was passed and implemented, was that done cleanly, or was there corruption involved in that too?
I don't know that there was corruption involved in it, but and cleanly is subjective, in terms of when these votes were pushed through. I remember being at the press conference for the celebration over the passage, and it was July the 4th, and I think it was about 4 a.m. So these things got pushed through in the middle of the night.
Bill DeWeese represented a district in southwestern Pennsylvania that is very rural. What was it about him that those people liked?
Well, Bill was gregarious. I mean, he could walk into a room and he would be the center of attention right away. In that sense, was good to be around. It was funny. Always had a good line, and people liked him. The fact that he was from Greene County didn't really make much difference. Other than the fact that he eventually got a number of prisons for his district, in the sense that, a lot of legislators wouldn't want a prison in their district, but if you have a rural county with high unemployment, it's a pretty good thing for a legislator to take a prison there, and he did.
He was reelected by his constituents while he was under indictment?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. He was elected for three cycles running, where first the rumors were out about him being investigated and all of that, and he won that election. The second was when he was indicted, he won. And it just, people in his district didn't care. They loved him anyway.
And he was on the ballot the day that he was convicted and sentenced.
He became a candidate. On the day he was sentenced, yes. But he had to turn that in. He had to resign shortly before he was sentenced.
Have you talked to any of these principal characters since they've been in?
No.
Are you allowed to?
Well, yes. So one or two people have gotten interviews with DeWeese at Retreat, but I have not been able to at this point. I tried to communicate with a couple of them without success. But DeWeese was a very fascinating figure. People liked him personally. They didn't trust him in a lot of cases. And, look at how he took power in the first place. It was a coup. I mean, some people would say, if you're you take part in something like that, what would they do to you if they could? So it always created this doubt about him. But his whole gambit of trying to still run for the House after he was convicted of a felony just baffled a lot of people. Of like, why would he do this? You knew that you can't be, a convicted felon and be sworn in as a legislator. You just can't do that. But I think what he was hoping was that he could get a real speedy appeal and, somehow get the conviction overturned and still hold on to his seat. He just wanted to hold on to that seat, but it didn't work out.
What was it that caused all this to unravel? When did it start that Bonusgate and Computergate and the use of taxpayer money for re-election, when did it start becoming the focus of criminal investigation?
Well, January 2007, the Harrisburg Patriot News published a front page story based on a copy of a memo that they had received that told people who received it not to talk about it, and suggested that that there were payments to people for their service. Thank you for your service. And Jan Murphy and Charlie Thompson started looking into it, and within a short period of time, a day or two after that letter surfaced, they were able to write a story that questioned the whole process, to say that people who didn't campaign didn't get any bonuses, and that people who did got these bonuses. And they speculated in that story, which I thought was amazingly good considering how little they knew at the time, that this could be, a far-ranging scheme that could cause a lot of problems for the House Democratic Caucus. Boy, they have that right.
Tom Corbett was the Attorney General at the time?
He was.
When did he pick it up?
It wasn't long after that, a couple weeks. First, Kevin Harley, who'd been his press secretary then, said that Corbett would conduct an inquiry into it.
Based on the newspaper reports?
Yeah. And I think he'd received a complaint from a new Republican Senator, John Eichelberger. And an inquiry is one thing. That can be low-key. You can just ask for some records. But it wasn't long after that, maybe a week or two, that Harley used the word investigation. And then Corbett himself said that he intended to investigate all four caucuses of the legislature: House Democrats, House Republicans, Senate Democrats. And that's when the investigation began. He subpoenaed some documents initially to look at them, but that's where it took off. But it wasn't until mid-2008 before there were charges filed against 12 House Democrats, including Mike Veon, two of whom were later acquitted.
Can you explain that process? How do you do that, and what exactly is a grand jury?
Well, grand jury is they use a statewide grand jury in Pennsylvania, which is this group of people who meet once a month, I believe it is, maybe for up to a week. And they hear all sorts of cases, allegations of, everything from drug dealing to political corruption. And they just run all these cases past the grand jury to see if the grand jury wants to issue a presentment, which is basically an indictment. That's what the grand jury does. But a lot of people who have been through that process are not real, confident in the grand jury system, because prosecutors, they say, can get a grand jury to do anything they want. As the expression goes, they could indict a ham sandwich if they wanted. And it's true that the prosecutor does guide this grand jury on its path to issuing a presentment. Although there certainly have been cases, not just here but elsewhere, where grand juries have said no.
So what was Tom Corbett's role in the whole thing?
Well, he was overseeing the whole investigation of the caucuses for what at that time appeared to be abuse of bonuses. And it turned out that as they moved into the House Republican caucus, we mentioned the charges filed against the House Democrats. When they moved into the House Republican caucus, they didn't really find bonus abuse, but they thought something was hinky with the computer contracts. And then it took an enormously long time to develop that case. It was really complex about the computer contracts and how they used them, how many different ones there were, and which ones were for public use, which ones for campaigns. So that really became Computergate, if you will, as opposed to Bonusgate.
Since so many Democrats were indicted in the first round, did then Attorney General Corbett feel the need to go after some Republicans?
Well, I guess he would say that he only went after those who deserved it. But politically, sure. Former Governor Rendell at one point was railing about the fact that only Democrats had been charged in Corbett's investigation, and where are the Republicans in all of this? And that became a constant, theme, by Corbett's critics of, look, he's only doing Democrats. So did he feel compelled then to get some Republicans? Some think so.
And so when the charges were filed, who were the big names that were brought in? we talked about, was Fumo part of that?
No.
Yeah, it was
Computergate? No, this was Republicans, and it was there were 10 House Republicans charged, and the two biggest names in that were John Perzel, the majority leader, and former majority whip Brett Fease. Then a couple of their very top aides, former chief of staffs, and some other mid-level staffers. Which reminds me, one thing that distinguished Corbett's investigations and the charges that were filed against these people from corruption cases, let's say in the 1970s, is that in the past you would see the legislator charged, and that's it. But here they went after staffers. You know, we never really seen that before. But what the defense of that, as I understand it, was that, well, these schemes were so complicated, they depended on staff to be able to carry these out, such as in Bonusgate. It's not something that Mike Veon could just do all on his own. So that was part of the belief. But what that enabled the prosecutors to do was to flip the lower level people and work their way up so that lower level staffers would quickly say, I don't want any part of this. What's the best deal? And most times they got probation, but they would be willing to testify. And they did a lot of that until it just came down to 3 who finally went to trial, and that was Perzel, Fease, and Brian Preskey, former chief of staff to Perzel. And at one point, well, there was another woman involved, a lower level staffer, but at one point, Preskey, Perzel pleaded guilty before the trial actually came up, and Preskey, during the trial, decided that he wanted to plead guilty, and he did, leaving Fease as the only person who was really the target. And it was unusual because normally it's you would see Perzel would be the guy they're going after at trial. In this case, it was Brett Fease who was the target at trial, and his former assistant, Jill Seaman. They were both convicted.
You cover a lot of ground that we haven't talked about yet in your book, and I want to, before we run out of time, touch on some of those. And one of the characters you talk about in your book, who was a few years earlier, is Ernie Preate. Mm-hmm. What should people know about Ernie Preate?
Ernie Preate was the Attorney General and proud of it, and he was one of the more aggressive Attorney Generals we've ever seen in Pennsylvania. He had amazing credentials to come in and take that office with an Ivy League education and war hero in Vietnam. And he came in and he, just ran through a lot of cases and was prosecuting people, convicting people. Ernie Preate was a very good trial lawyer himself. He could connect with a jury. But he ran for governor, and it looked at one point like he was the front runner among several Republicans running for governor. Tom Ridge was one of the others. But word came out that there was this Pennsylvania Crime Commission investigation of Preate for his dealings with video poker operators. And that swirled around him for a long time. Ernie led the charge to dismantle the Pennsylvania Crime Commission, which the legislature did. They believed this Attorney General who said, look, this is an outrage. They're insulting Italians. It's ethnic slurs to look at mob people, who were Italian. So I never quite got that. In fact, to be a made member, you had to be Sicilian. So, but they played it that way, that this was this big smear. Now, look, the Pennsylvania Crime Commission may have and probably did hurt people with guilt by association stories that they had in their annual reports that, so-and-so was connected to the mob. Well, what's that mean? It doesn't mean they were really involved, but maybe they just knew the guy. So there were some problems with it. There's no doubt about that. But finally, the Pennsylvania Crime Commission, before it was disbanded, met and issued a report that said that Ernie Preate had taken this campaign money from video poker operators, and the suggestion was that he did that in return for promising to go light on them in prosecutions as Attorney General. He vehemently denied that. The Harrisburg Patriot News played a big role in the investigation. Meanwhile, there was a federal investigation underway. The feds finally caught up with Preate on that, forced a guilty plea out of him, and he went to prison for mail fraud. To this day, he would say he was not corrupt, that he didn't do anything in return for video poker operators. He just made a technical mistake. That's what he says.
Going back a little bit further, Al Benedict. You say Al Benedict was the best liar I ever met.
He was. He got through 8 years as Auditor General with a job-selling scandal swirling around him, particularly in his second term. And he just told everyone, including me, right to my face, that he wasn't involved in anything like that. He never did anything like that. That's just wrong. And he was very convincing about it. And he was very convincing even after his former top aide by the name of John Kerr was convicted at trial here in Dauphin County.
How did that system work? The job-selling system?
Well, if you gave campaign money to some bagmen for Al Benedict that went to the party or his own campaign funds, they would make sure you got a job through the Auditor General's office, such as a field auditor. It was so pervasive that at one point they discovered that there were some field auditors out in a school doing an audit who couldn't even speak English. They were Greek, and he had gotten them this job, and so it's you paid, you got a job. It's that simple. Al always denied it. Kerr was convicted of a job-selling scheme. Everybody thought that the feds will flip Kerr and he'll come in and he'll testify against Benedict, that Benedict is in real trouble. Kerr didn't do that right away. He didn't, and it seemed like Benedict was off the hook. But it wasn't until later that the feds did convince Kerr to wear a wire and go in and have hours and hours of conversations after he got out with Benedict, I guess, reminiscing about old times and all the things they'd done. And Benedict incriminated himself on these tapes. The feds were listening to all of this, and they had enough to indict him on that and a whole bunch of other charges. He pled guilty and went to prison. And it was a shame. He was one of the more likable characters in a way, like DeWeese, of all these people that I've known over the years. He's a heck of a nice guy to be around, and if you met him when you walked out of here, you would think that guy is really something, because he had this knack of connecting with people that some politicians have, where they'll look you in the eye and they listen to you, and it seems like you're the only person in the world to them. And he had that knack.
And a more recent story is the one with the Orie sisters, Jane Orie, Janine Orie, and Joan Orie Melvin. Can you tell that story?
Yes. The title of the chapter in the book is A Family Tragedy, because it really was. It was amazing to see three sisters prosecuted, charged with crimes for political corruption. Began with a raid by the Allegheny County District Attorney's Office on Jane Orie's Senate office. And in there they found some political materials of some sort. They investigated her. They charged her with using public resources for campaigns. It was never a great deal of money, unlike Bonusgate and Computergate, where you're dealing with millions. This was, $30,000, $40,000, maybe more, but not an enormous amount of money. And the idea was that she had used her staff to help her sister, Joan Orie Melvin, in two different races for the Supreme Court, the second of which, Joan Orie Melvin won and became a Supreme Court justice. She was a sitting Supreme Court justice when these indictments came down, and it was their sister, Janine, who worked as an assistant to Joan Orie Melvin as a judge.
You say in your book, for Jane Orie to be charged with crimes was a lot like Mother Teresa being arrested for street walking.
That's the way it seemed to me. If someone, 5 years ago had said, give me a list of the 10 people in the legislature you think are least likely to ever get in trouble with the law, she would have been on it. You make mistakes in evaluating people. Some would say it's not mistaken that she was, that this was a case that shouldn't have been prosecuted. But hey, a jury in Allegheny County convicted her. And what happened is that there were 2 trials, and at the first trial, a lot of people thought that she had a shot at getting off. But during the trial, they brought in some evidence and put it up on a screen, and it showed that documents had been doctored. And these were doctors that were, let's just say, helpful to the defense. So where did these come from? How did they get into evidence? And there's a mistrial declared. A new investigation starts, including an investigation of the documents. And when Jane goes to trial again, she gets whacked, not just on the staff helping her sister, but having forged documents and putting those in at a trial. And Judge Jeffrey Manning, when he sentenced her, said that was the worst part of all of this, and that's why he gave her the sentence that he did, which I believe it's in the back of the book there, was 2.5 to 10.
We're almost out of time, but I do want to ask, after going through all of this and covering the legislature for 27 years like you have, is there any reason for optimism?
Not much.
You think it will continue to be cyclical, or any cure for what you write about?
Well, there is a cure, but they won't do it because it's against their self-interest. In the back of the book, there are numerous recommendations from different reform groups and people who have watched the legislature. And some of them range from, going back to a part-time legislature, initiative and referendum where voters can put things on the ballot, reducing the size of the legislature, and banning any gifts, that they'd be able to receive. But reducing the size, going back to a part-time legislature or somehow initiative and referendum, those are things that take power away from the legislature and also remove seats. People would lose their seats and that sort of thing. It's the kind of thing they would not be enamored of doing. But it would be the kind of thing that, if that happened, that there might be a chance to try to change some of these things. But the way it is, if it just continues, maybe things will be fine for 10 years. I hope it's 20, maybe even longer, but it could slip back again.
Well, we are out of time. We've been speaking with Brad Bumsted. He is the author of this book, Keystone Corruption, A Pennsylvania Insider's View of a State Gone Wrong. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to a podcast of PA Books, a production of PCN, the Pennsylvania Cable Network. We'd like to hear from you. Our email address is pabooks@pcntv.com. Like us on Facebook to learn more about PA Books.